Hello, this is a short video to explain why Baroque painting is different than other painters and what I mean by liquid siding. My name is Mike Root, and I've been painting houses for almost 20 years, 16 of those years in business for myself. In that time, I've developed a painting method that I believe to be similar in durability to that of most vinyl siding and windows for a fraction of the cost. Don't assume you need new siding. Every day, people in America replace perfectly good siding and windows simply because it hasn't been painted correctly. In most houses under 30 years old, you don't gain any energy efficiency by replacing the siding or windows, and new siding and windows doesn't last forever. They fade, they stain, and they break all the time. I have a client that is an accountant. She's very diligent about this kind of thing and got numerous bids on replacing her siding and windows. She calculated that she could keep her house painted properly every 10 years or so and get to change colors as fashions change for simply the cost of the interest on the loan she would have had to get to replace her siding and windows. Painting your house is more than just about what color it is. It is an integral part of protecting your house from the harsh elements of Nebraska. Keeping it maintained properly is part of keeping up your biggest investment, your house. It's like changing the oil in your car. But not painting your house at all or hiring a cheap painting contractor is more like not putting oil in your car at all. The results can be total failure of your siding and be very expensive. There was a lot of recalled siding that was put up in the 90s. Most of it has been replaced by now, because frankly, if it hasn't, it'd be falling off by now. There's a lot more of that siding that's perfectly fine if it's painted correctly. Ultimately, it comes down to a question of whether you can recoup the enormous cost of new siding and windows when you resell your house. It's that simple. My liquid siding method consists of a 3-step process. First, completely stripping any loose or failing paint. Any paint's guarantee is null and void if you put it over loose or peeling paint. Number 2, my double primer system. And third, using a high-quality paint.
Believe it or not, this old paint is the perfect illustration of why we strip paint. This house was painted 12 years ago with the cheapest paint job you can imagine. They just sprayed on primer and paint. Here, and here, where it's smooth, means that before the last paint job, all of the paint had simply fallen off from neglect. By simply that fact, this raw wood from the cheapest of paint jobs has lasted 12 years. It's in good shape. I can't even scrape it off. But where there's old alligator paint, it's completely failing. Raw wood, smooth, in good shape. Old alligator paint, completely failing. That's all.
Ultimately, I believe in proof, and here it is. I've been in business for 16 years, and I check up on the houses that I've painted over the years to see what works and what doesn't. I stripped this house in 1995. These pictures are taken in 2010, and as you can see from the paint, it is still pristine, although a little dirty. So I actually can't answer the question, how much longer will stripping the paint down to raw wood make my paint job last? The clock is still running. Here is a classic example of what happens to a house when it isn't painted correctly. This house is just down the street from me, and I drove by it every day while it was being painted. There are 3 things I tell people never to do when painting a house. The contractor that painted this house did the first 2. Number 1, don't power wash in lieu of scraping loose paint, because paint is harder than wood, and if you use enough pressure to remove the paint, you will ruin your siding, which I see all the time. The very best case scenario is you're going to get a horrible job of removing the loose paint off your house. Number 2, work the primer in with a brush. If the primer isn't worked into the wood and the cracks of the old paint, you are very simply wasting your time, and your paint job will not last more than 2 years. This house looked fine its first summer. By the end of the first winter, it was starting to peel. But after only 2 winters, 2 years, it is now visibly peeling from the street. They'll be lucky if they don't lose their siding completely. Cheap paint jobs are not quick, temporary fixes. They often cause more damage than they help. Number 3. Always drop the storm windows when you paint a window, and never caulk in a storm. This is what happens when you don't drop storm windows when painting. You end up creating a dam at the bottom of the window where the rain collects, then seeping into the wood and causing wet wood and dry rot. The carpentry to fix these windows cost as much as painting the entire house.
Here's a classic example of what happens when you don't paint a window correctly. Right here, and that's starting to have damage over here and along here. So what we've done is stripped completely down the bottom of this window so it's down to raw wood. And the reason we do this will be really obvious in just a second. This is what we call thirsty wood. And here's some XIM primer. And just see how it just absorbs into there. And especially on this vertical board, it literally, due to capillary action, will soak up in this piece of wood. Here, this is even a better example of it. I'll put that in there. And now the bottom piece of that wood is sealed off forever. Now I'm finishing priming with the XIM, and once this has dried, we will cover this entire area with latex primer. So it has 2 coats of primer, one to soak in the wood and the latex primer to adhere to this primer and to have what we call build or thickness in the painting industry. Okay. The reason we always tape off a window is if I'm a painter and I'm trying to cut in this window to make a nice straight line, I'm not going to be worried about working paint into this crack. And that is the most important thing you can possibly do when you're painting a window. Now that we have it taped off, I can work that paint up onto that tape without worrying about getting it on the window, allowing me to fill in that crack, which is absolutely vital. That's the entire idea of priming. Now this is
Finally, we use what is, in my opinion, the best paint on the market for our weather conditions here in Nebraska, Duration paint from Sherwin-Williams. Duration paint is actually based on a completely different resin than any other paint. Sherwin-Williams has an exclusive patent on it. It comes with a lifetime guarantee. Now, as with any paint, that guarantee only applies if it is applied to primed raw wood. Yet another reason to strip paint. Finally, even if you're not sure how long you're going to live in your house, a quality paint job is still a good investment. If you move out in 4 or 5 years and you have to repaint, you haven't saved any money. Ask any realtor. People are visual. When you're trying to resell your house, you can list the square footage and the age of the air conditioner, etc., but none of that will make as much of an impact as the way the house looks. Unlike most warranties, mine is transferable to the next owner, because I know if I do it right, it will last. Baroque painting, where it looks better and lasts longer.